It all began with a scent, one that didn't belong to her, or at least, one that shouldn't have. It was rich, floral, and unmistakably luxurious, the kind that lingered long after its wearer had left the room. Emily never chose fragrances like that. She always gravitated towards soft, understated vanilla scents, something subtle that blended rather than overwhelmed. But that night, when she slipped into bed beside me, the unfamiliar perfume clung to her fresh, as if she had just applied it before walking through the door. I said nothing. Not then. Instead, I lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing as she drifted off within minutes. That, in itself, was unusual. Emily never fell asleep that fast. She was the type to scroll endlessly through her phone until exhaustion took over. But that night was different. She turned away, and in less than 5 minutes, she was gone. My mind wouldn't let it go. The scent, the way she rushed to bed, how she barely looked at me when she walked in, it all merged into something unsettling. I forced myself to breathe, trying to rationalize. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe the scent had rubbed off from a friend. Maybe it was from a store. Maybe. A vibration cut through the silence. Her phone. It lit up on the nightstand, screen face down like it had been for weeks now. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. The brief glow revealed a name. Nathan. Nathan. I didn't know a Nathan. Sleep never came for me that night. The next morning, I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was nothing, just a coworker, a friend, an innocent conversation. But the perfume refused to fade from my thoughts, embedding itself like a stain I couldn't erase. By the time the weekend arrived, my nerves were wound tight. Emily, however, was her usual self, too usual. She laughed at my jokes, asked about my day, curled up beside me on the couch like she always had. But I wasn't naive, and I wasn't going to ignore what was right in front of me. So, when she casually mentioned plans to meet Lena, her best friend, I did something I had never done before. I followed her. She didn't go to Lena's. She didn't even drive in that direction. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a dimly lit restaurant on the outskirts of the city, somewhere unfamiliar, a place we had never been together. Somewhere she clearly didn't expect to see me. I parked across the lot, heart pounding, and watched as she stepped inside. Her posture was careful, her eyes scanning the area as though checking if she had been followed. She took a seat near the back, settling in as if waiting for someone. Not even 5 minutes later, he arrived. Nathan. I knew it was him before she even reacted. The way her face lit up, the way she leaned forward, reaching across the table to touch his hand, it was all the confirmation I needed. And just as a wave of red-hot anger surged through me, I noticed something that nearly made me laugh. She was wearing the perfume, the same scent from that night. And suddenly, I knew exactly how long this had been happening. Sitting in my car, fingers clenched around the steering wheel, I watched my wife lean in closer to a man I had never seen before. Every instinct screamed at me to storm in, to confront them, to demand the truth. But I held back. A darker part of me wanted to see just how far this went, to know the full extent of her betrayal. Emily had never been good at lying when put on the spot. I needed undeniable proof. Not for me. I already understood what I was witnessing, but for what would come next. So I waited. Nathan was tall, sharply dressed, exuding the effortless confidence of someone who had always gotten his way. He had that polished, self-assured air, the kind that made people believe he belonged wherever he went. And Emily, my wife, was captivated. She laughed, twirling her fingers around the rim of her wine glass, eyes fixed on him. I had seen that laugh before, the exact one she used when we first started dating. The one meant to impress, to draw someone in. Realization hit like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. It wasn't some careless, impulsive lapse in judgment. This was deeper. This was worse. She was invested. For over an hour, they sat there, wrapped in their own world, unconcerned with anything outside their little bubble. He touched her hand. She didn't pull away. She leaned in, whispered something, looked at him as if he was the only one in the room. My pulse roared in my ears, my jaw aching from the way I clenched it. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She checked her phone, smiled, and typed a message. A second later, my own phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to look. I already knew. Emily, dinner's running a little late. Love you. My stomach twisted. The sheer audacity. The ease with which she lied, feeding me sweet, empty words while sitting across from someone else. I had seen enough. As I stepped out of the car and moved toward the restaurant, my heartbeat grew heavier with every stride. My mind was no longer processing thoughts, only raw instinct and unchecked fury were driving me forward. But just as I reached the entrance, something unexpected halted me in my tracks. Emily and Nathan were getting up from their seats. They weren't lingering for another drink or wrapping up their conversation. They were leaving. Together. Instinctively, I stepped back, positioning myself out of sight. My eyes remained locked on them as Emily led the way, confidently walking ahead of Nathan toward her car. There was no hesitation in her movements, no cautious glances over her shoulder. The concern of being caught had completely vanished. She was at ease, too at ease. It was clear this wasn't a first-time occurrence. And in that moment, an undeniable truth settled over me. She wasn't going home. The rhythmic pounding of my pulse filled my ears as I watched them reach her vehicle. Emily pulled out her keys, letting out a laugh at something Nathan had said. Without missing a beat, she unlocked the passenger side door, not the driver's side. That was all the confirmation I needed. They were heading somewhere together. My hands curled into fists, fingernails pressing hard against my palms. This wasn't an innocent dinner, nor was it a casual meeting between friends. My wife was about to drive off with another man right in front of me, and I stood there, helplessly watching it unfold. I could have confronted her, could have called out her name, demanded an explanation, and made a scene right then and there. But something in me, something sharper, more calculating, told me to wait. I needed to see where this would lead. And so, acting on pure instinct, I rushed back to my car, turned the ignition, and followed them. She drove with an air of ease, completely unbothered by the possibility of being followed. There were no quick glances in the rearview mirror, no signs of hesitation. She took the freeway, heading toward the city's outskirts where the glow of streetlights grew sparse, and the road stretched emptier. A heavy sensation settled in my stomach. Where was she going? A hotel? A secluded place where they wouldn't be seen? For nearly 20 minutes, I trailed behind until she pulled into a small, private apartment complex. It was tucked away, lacking any noticeable landmarks. The realization hit me. This had been planned. She had done this before. Emily parked in a designated spot with practiced familiarity. Nathan exited the car first, moving as though he belonged there. She followed, not even sparing a glance around. No nervous hesitation. No second thoughts. She was comfortable. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I remained frozen, caught between fury, shock, and something else I couldn't yet name. I watched her disappear into the building alongside him, walking through the front entrance as though it were second nature, as if she had made this trip countless times. That was when reality sank in. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a fleeting, impulsive decision. My wife had built a separate life, one that I was never meant to be part of. I lost track of time, just sitting there, my mind reeling. Had I ignored the signs? Dismissed the excuses? How long had this been happening right under my nose? Then, my phone vibrated. I glanced down. Emily. Love you. Heading home soon. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. She was texting me from inside his apartment. Even now, she was keeping up the pretense, maintaining the illusion of the devoted wife. And that was the final push I needed. Every last shred of doubt dissolved. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. I had been deceived. I inhaled deeply, exhaling slowly as my decision solidified. Confronting her now wouldn't accomplish what I needed. I had to let her return home, allow her to act as if nothing had happened, let her bury herself deeper in her own lies. And when the time was right, I would put an end to this charade once and for all. Without hesitation, I drove home, ensuring I arrived before she did. I needed to be there first, to see her walk through the door and pretend. The wait felt endless. Seated on the couch, my hands rested on my knees, my mind running through every possible scenario. Would she greet me with a smile? Kiss me goodnight? Look me in the eyes and tell me she loved me, knowing exactly where she had been just moments before? My phone buzzed again. Emily. On my way home. Sorry dinner took so long. Can't wait to see you. I stared at the message, my vision blurring slightly. Once upon a time, those words would have meant something. They would have brought a smile to my face, prompted me to respond with something affectionate. Maybe I would have even gotten up to meet her at the door. But that time was gone. I didn't reply. 30 minutes passed before the sound of the garage door opening filled the silence. I remained still as she entered, the sharp click of her heels echoing through the space. She set her purse down by the counter, sighing as though the evening had drained her. Hey, babe, she said, stretching her arms as if exhausted. God, that dinner was so long. She smiled, as if nothing had happened. My fingers curled into fists once again, nails pressing into my skin, but I didn't move, didn't react, just observed. Emily stepped closer, leaning down to place a kiss on my cheek. I let her. The familiar scent of perfume filled the air, the same one she only ever wore around him. Without hesitation, she collapsed onto the couch beside me, exhaling another dramatic sigh. I swear, Lena just kept talking and talking about this guy she's seeing. It was exhausting. She laughed as if everything was just some amusing joke. I loved her, truly, but there were moments when I wished I could just tell her to stop talking. She wasn't just fabricating small lies. She was constructing an entirely false reality. And in that moment, something inside me clicked into place. A cold, sharp clarity settled over me. I wasn't going to raise my voice. I wasn't going to argue. Instead, I would let her dig herself deeper into the web of deception she had spun. So, I simply nodded. Yeah? What's he like? Her face lit up, excited that I was playing along. Oh my God, you wouldn't believe it, she gushed. He's one of those finance guys. You know the type: suit, tie, the whole thing. Total player. I warned her to be careful, but you know Lena. I watched her closely, letting her go on without interruption. She had no idea. No clue that I had been sitting in my car just an hour ago, watching her with Nathan. No idea that I had followed her straight to his apartment. And then, she yawned, an actual, tired yawn, as if she'd had a long night. I'm gonna shower and crash, okay? She said. I nodded. Yeah, go ahead. She leaned in and kissed my forehead. Kissed my forehead. Love you, she murmured before walking away, disappearing down the hall. Completely secure in her beautifully crafted illusion. I sat there for a long time, staring into nothing, my mind racing through every possible way to handle this. Then, finally, I stood up. I had work to do. That night, I barely slept. Emily, on the other hand, was out like a light, her breathing slow and steady beside me. She lay there in perfect peace, as if she hadn't just walked into our home draped in deception. As if she hadn't spent her evening wrapped around another man, only to return and kiss me goodnight. I turned onto my side, watching her in the dim light that filtered through the curtains. For years, I had looked at this woman and seen my future, the person I would build my life with, the one I trusted above anyone else. But now, all I saw was a stranger. Strangely enough, I wasn't angry anymore. The fury had burned through me so completely that it left only one thing behind: cold, focused determination. Emily was too comfortable. She believed she was untouchable. And that made this dangerous. She wasn't just telling lies. She was living two separate lives, switching between them seamlessly, without hesitation. And that meant she wasn't going to stop. Not unless I made her. I moved carefully, sliding out of bed without disturbing her. Then, I grabbed my phone and made my way into the living room. It was time to secure my insurance policy. Opening my laptop, I started digging. Our shared bank accounts showed nothing suspicious. Emily was too smart for that. But when I checked her personal credit card statements, I found exactly what I was looking for. Hotel charges, dinner receipts, ride-sharing transactions to places she never mentioned. Next, I went through our phone records. There he was. Nathan. Call after call, text after text. Some late at night, some in the middle of the day. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fall into place. I started compiling everything: screenshots, statements, dates, locations. I wasn't just planning to confront her. I was going to overwhelm her with the truth. Then, I paused. This wasn't only about me. For years, Emily had convinced my friends and family that she was the perfect wife, that we were happy, that I was lucky to have her. If I was going to expose her, I needed to make sure that everyone closest to me saw her for who she truly was. So, I devised a plan. Step 1. Gather undeniable evidence. Step 2. Keep up the act. Let her think nothing had changed. Step 3. Strike when she least expected it. Because Emily had one final lie to tell me, and I was going to let her walk straight into it. The next morning, I woke up before her. She was still curled up beneath the blankets, her face peaceful, blissfully unaware that her world was about to collapse. I went through my routine, brushed my teeth, made coffee, scrolled through my phone, acting like everything was just as it had always been. Like I wasn't holding a loaded weapon of truth, ready to shatter the fantasy she had so carefully built. A few minutes later, Emily strolled into the kitchen, stretching and yawning, wearing one of my shirts like she had any right to. Morning, she greeted me, pressing a light kiss to my cheek. I let her. I needed her to believe I was still in the dark. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from me at the table. Absent-mindedly stirring in some sugar, she spoke casually. I was thinking, maybe we should take a trip soon. Just the two of us. Somewhere nice. A trip. She wanted to go on vacation with me. Her husband, I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. "Oh yeah?" I asked, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Where were you thinking?" She tilted her head as if she were truly considering it. "I don't know. Maybe that cabin we went to a couple of years ago?" She smiled, soft and sweet. "It'd be nice to get away." I stared at her, wondering who she was really picturing in her mind. Was it me sitting across from her in that cabin? Or was it Nathan? Had she already mapped out her next excuse? Another night where she'd claimed to be out with Lena, while in reality, she was slipping into his bed? Beneath the table, I could feel the weight of my phone in my pocket. The evidence was undeniable: messages, receipts, phone logs. I had everything I needed to prove her betrayal. But I wasn't ready to act just yet. With a calm smile, I responded to her casual conversation. "Sounds nice," I said, keeping my expression neutral. "Let's talk about it later." She reached across the table, her fingers squeezing mine. "Love you," she murmured. I returned the gesture, my voice steady. "Love you too." That was the last time those words would ever leave my lips for her. Because that night, the final piece of my plan fell into place. I reached out to Lena. We weren't particularly close, but I had her number from mutual gatherings. I sent a quick message. Me, "Hey, weird question. What was the name of that restaurant you and Emily went to last night? Thinking of taking her there sometime." Her response came in less than 5 minutes. "Lena, what? I didn't see Emily last night." I stared at the message, my chest tightening. I had already known the truth, but seeing it confirmed by someone else sent a new wave of anger through me. Emily was in the shower when I entered the bedroom. Her phone sat on the nightstand, face up, unlocked. Too easy. I picked it up, navigating to her messages. Nathan's name was at the top. "Nathan, can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing. Emily, I know. I wish I could see you again sooner." The room seemed to tilt around me. I had suspected it, but seeing the words spelled out in her own messages ignited a white-hot fury inside me. The sound of the water shutting off pulled me back. Quickly, I placed the phone exactly as it had been and walked out of the room as if nothing had happened. Confronting her now wasn't the plan. Not yet. The stage had to be set. Because after tomorrow, she would never forget what was coming. The following day was a test, one that would reveal just how far she would go. A test of how easily she could lie to my face. Most of all, a test of whether I could keep my anger in check long enough to carry out the next step. Emily acted like everything was normal, and that was the worst part. She kissed me before leaving for work, texted me around noon to ask if I needed anything from the store, even sent me a meme, like we were just another happy couple. Like she hadn't been in another man's bed less than 48 hours ago. I played along. The only difference was that I had taken the day off work. I told her I had an important project and would be working from home. That was a lie. I had somewhere to be. Nathan's apartment. I had memorized the address after following her there before. But I didn't go straight to his door. I wanted to see something first. Emily had mentioned having a late meeting today, that she might be home later than usual. I intended to find out just how late. I parked in the same spot across the lot where I had watched them before and waited. 6:30 in the evening. No sign of her. 7:45. Still nothing. 8:10. Her car finally pulled in. I held my breath as I watched my wife step out, adjusting her hair, smoothing her clothes, like she was preparing for a date. Except it wasn't a date. It was something far worse. Without hesitation, she walked straight to his door, knocked, and waited. When Nathan opened it, she smiled at him like he was the best thing to ever happen to her. He pulled her inside without a second thought. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, knuckles turning white. I could end it now. I could storm up to that door, pound on it until they had no choice but to face me, and watch as their perfect little fantasy shattered. But that wouldn't be enough. Emily was a performer. She would cry, she would beg, she would twist the truth into some fabricated excuse, claim it was a mistake, say it was the first time, anything to manipulate her way out of it. No, I needed something she couldn't talk her way around. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I pulled out my phone and took pictures. Her entering his home. The timestamp on my screen proving exactly when it happened. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy the illusion she had built. For the next 2 hours, I sat there, staring at my phone, watching the minutes tick by. Then, at precisely 10:23, my phone vibrated. "Emily, just leaving work now. Ugh, today was so long. Can't wait to get home to you." A slow, cold smile formed on my face. She had no idea she had just been caught in 4K. I snapped one final picture before driving home. Because tomorrow, I was going to watch her entire world collapse. The next morning, I woke before Emily. She lay curled under the blankets, breathing slow and steady, like she didn't have a single worry in the world. Like she wasn't about to walk straight into the worst mistake of her life. I got up, showered, and dressed. Then I made coffee, just as I always did. Today was about routine, about making sure she believed everything was perfectly normal. Because by nightfall, her world would never be the same again. At exactly 7:15, Emily wandered into the kitchen, stretching and yawning, rubbing her eyes like a wife waking up to a beautiful, peaceful morning. She had no idea what was coming. "Morning," she murmured, reaching for a cup of coffee. She leaned against the counter, meeting my gaze without an ounce of guilt. I could feel exhaustion settling deep into my bones. That meeting had dragged on forever. I almost chuckled to myself. She was truly committed to this act. Even after spending the entire night entangled with another man, she continued lying to me as if deception was second nature. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching her. "Yeah? What time did it end?" She exhaled sharply, rolling her eyes as if annoyed by my question. "God, not until almost 10. Then I had to stop for gas. I was so wiped out, I just wanted to come home and crash." She took a sip of her drink, her expression casual. "Were you already asleep when I got in?" The sheer audacity of it all was staggering. I let my gaze linger on her a moment longer than necessary before offering a small smile. "Yeah, you look tired." She had no idea that I had been outside, sitting in the driveway, watching the clock, that I had tracked her every move, gathered proof, timestamps, photos, records. A collection of undeniable truths ready to detonate at the perfect moment. But not yet. Patience was key. I kept my voice calm, controlled. "I was thinking, we should go out tonight. Just the two of us." Emily's face lit up instantly, her excitement almost too easy. "Really?" I nodded. "Dinner. Maybe a drink afterward. A little date night." This was part of the setup. Emily had spent so much time trying to convince me that our marriage was unshakable, that she was the devoted wife she pretended to be. If she declined, it would raise suspicion. She couldn't say no. She stepped closer, a bright smile on her lips. "I'd love that." I pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Great. Let's go somewhere nice." She had no clue this wasn't a date. It was an execution. That night, I made reservations at a high-end restaurant downtown, a sophisticated place, elegant and refined. Somewhere public. Somewhere she wouldn't be able to scream, bolt, or manipulate her way out of what was coming. When she emerged from the bedroom in a sleek black dress, looking every bit the picture of a loving wife, I had to suppress a laugh. She was clueless. The man standing before her wasn't her husband anymore. He was her judge, her jury, her executioner. And in just a few hours, I was going to tear her entire world apart. The restaurant was perfect. Dim lighting, soft music, a quiet hum of conversation filling the space. The kind of place designed for romance and intimacy. The kind of place a man would take his wife if he still loved her. Emily sat across from me, swirling her wine, completely at ease. She had no idea this wasn't an evening of rekindled love. It was her reckoning. She smiled. "This was a great idea." I nodded, my expression steady. "I thought we deserved something special." She reached across the table, threading her fingers through mine. "I love you." I squeezed her hand, my final gesture of mercy. "I love you too," I said. "That's why I need to ask you something." She tilted her head slightly, still smiling. "Of course." Lifting my glass, I took a slow sip, my eyes locked on hers. Then, in the calmest voice I had ever used, I asked, "How was work last night?" Not even a flicker of hesitation. She was too skilled at this. "Ugh, awful," she groaned. "I told you, the meeting ran so late. I was completely drained when I got home." I nodded as if I believed her. Right. And Lena? Have you talked to her today?" A brief pause. Barely noticeable. But I caught it. "Not really," she said smoothly. "Just a couple of texts." "Why?" I leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms with deliberate ease. "Because I asked her which restaurant you two went to last night." Silence. A full second passed before Emily forced a smile, too bright, too plastic. "What?" Without a word, I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. The screen was already open to my text exchange with Lena, the one where she told me she hadn't seen Emily at all. Emily's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "Oh, I cut her off." "Try again." Her breath hitched slightly. Maybe she forgot?" "I mean, we were together, just—" I tilted my head, my tone flat. "Don't." Just don't. The air between us shifted. The pretense of a romantic evening dissolved in an instant. Emily wasn't smiling anymore. I followed you, I stated simply. Her entire body went rigid. I followed you to Nathan's apartment. The words landed like a blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. She sat motionless, lips slightly parted, eyes wide. I watched you walk in. I waited. For hours. And then, when you finally came home, you kissed me and told me you were at work. Still, she didn't speak. I leaned forward, my voice dropping lower. I have photos. Timestamps. Credit card statements. Texts. I tapped my phone. I have everything. Emily swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. Finally, she found her voice. Okay. She exhaled, forcing a weak, humorless laugh. I can explain. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. I almost laughed in her face. No, I said, shaking my head. You really can't. The realization sank in. There was no escape. No carefully crafted lie, no false tears, no desperate plea would undo this. I could see it happening, the frantic scramble for an excuse, a way out. And then, she shifted tactics. Her lips curled, her expression darkening. And for the first time, the real Emily emerged. You went through my phone, she snapped, her voice sharp with accusation. You followed me? What is wrong with you? I laughed. She actually laughed. That was her defense? That I had somehow invaded her privacy? Her eyes flashed with something dark and unpleasant as she spat out her response. You're insane. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. I'm insane? Interesting. I'm not the one sneaking around with another man behind my husband's back. For a split second, her confident facade cracked. I saw it, the exact moment she realized she had lost. But she wasn't ready to give up just yet. Desperation flickered in her voice as she softened her tone, reaching out for my hand. Jake, please, let's talk about this at home. I recoiled from her touch as if she were carrying something contagious. We don't have a home, I said flatly. The color drained from her face. What? I pulled a neatly folded paper from my pocket and slid it across the table. Her hands hovered over it for a moment before she finally picked it up. As her eyes scanned the document, her expression crumbled. Her fingers trembled. Divorce papers, I confirmed in a calm, steady voice. She gasped as though the paper had burned her and dropped it onto the table. You can't be serious. A slow, knowing smile spread across my face. Oh, but I am. You've been using the threat of divorce like a weapon for so long, I continued, my voice quiet but firm. Every argument, every disagreement, every time something didn't go your way, you threw it in my face. I leaned in slightly, locking eyes with her. Eventually, I got tired of it. So I decided to take you up on it. She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to plead, but it didn't matter anymore. I was done. Rising from my seat, I grabbed my jacket. Dinner's on you, I said before turning for the door. I left her sitting there, frozen, with the divorce papers in her trembling hands, her world crumbling around her. I didn't look back. The drive home was quiet. City lights blurred past me, but I barely noticed them. My mind wasn't clouded anymore. It was clear, sharp. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt free. It was like I had just walked away from a house engulfed in flames, one that I had once called home. The heat still brushed against my back, but I didn't care. Let it burn. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I already knew what needed to happen next. Emily hadn't followed me. Maybe she was still sitting at that restaurant, staring at those papers, struggling to understand how she had lost control. Maybe she was on the phone with Nathan, feeding him a web of lies, trying to salvage what was left. Or maybe, just maybe, she was realizing that Nathan wasn't going to save her. Not that it mattered. I stepped inside and headed straight for the bedroom. Without hesitation, I yanked open the closet and pulled out every last one of her things, clothes, makeup, shoes, handbags. Everything. I grabbed a couple of suitcases, tossed them onto the bed, and began packing. Fast. Efficient. Final. I wasn't going to wait for her. I wasn't going to let her walk back into this house like she still belonged here. By the time I finished, the clock had nearly struck midnight. And as if on cue, the front door creaked open. Emily stood there, eyes red, mascara smeared. Her expression teetered between fury and desperation. I didn't say a word. Instead, I grabbed the suitcases, her suitcases, and walked right past her, setting them down on the porch. She inhaled sharply. Jake. I turned back, leaning against the doorframe with my arms crossed. You're not sleeping here tonight. She blinked, as if struggling to process my words. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. This is my house too. No, I replied simply. Not anymore. She stared at me, waiting, hoping I would waver, that I would cave in and let her in, let her explain. But I stood firm, silent. Then something in her changed. The vulnerability vanished. The real Emily surfaced again. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh and shook her head. You think you're so strong, don't you? She took a step forward, her gaze dark and cutting. You're pathetic, Jake. You never appreciated me. I did something that took her by surprise. I smiled. An actual, genuine smile. Go ahead, I said smoothly. Say it. Her mouth snapped shut. Because she knew. She knew that if she said it, if she admitted it out loud, there would be no taking it back. I tilted my head slightly. Nothing to say? That's a first. Her jaw tightened, hands shaking at her sides. You're going to regret this. I nodded and stepped back inside. Sure. Then, without another glance, I shut the door in her face. I stood there for a while, listening. Silence. Then, finally, I heard it, the sound of her picking up the suitcases, the sharp click of her heels as she walked away. And just like that, she was gone. I exhaled deeply, leaning against the door. My heart pounded, but not with anger, not with fear, with relief. Because for the first time in a long, long time, I was finally free.